Welcome to MINDSHOCK. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and I am here with a very special guest today, a patron who has rubbed shoulders with the highest levels of academia. This guy has been through the halls of MIT, Princeton, many different so-called prestigious institutions. And we will be discussing the very nature of epistemology with him, an actual professor. And I know a lot of the MINDSHOCK listeners who are not well-versed in logic always appeal to authority and credentials, logical fallacies. So we'll have a chance to have a very in-depth conversation with someone literally from the highest esteemed halls of academia, or as I sometimes call it, quackademia, and we'll get his opinion on that and more, and why examining the very philosophy of epistemology itself is so important to anyone who is concerned with the truth. As always, if you want to help support the podcast, help keep up awareness in the world that seems to be very lacking in logic and reason. And obviously on MINDSHOCK, we try to bring it back. It might not be too late to turn the ship of humanity around. And you can check the link in the description for that. You could also subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. If you're not getting them, just like and comment on more videos. That's how the YouTube algorithm works. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Like and share. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast, like our guest here today, depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. Okay, so the floor is yours. Introduce yourself and your background.
Well, hello. I'm Professor Jay Smith, and been very much enjoying the MINDSHOCK podcast. So, as far as my background goes, I worked several years at a national laboratory, and I have degrees, and I have publications. I've worked in the realm of science, and I've been a working scientist, and I've also had some exposure to some of these prestigious institutions.
You want to name drop some of them for the people concerned with those things?
Well, I've been there and literally been speaking with heads of departments and coordinating with people at MIT, Princeton, also University of Chicago, because this is another aside that I had meant to mention to you, Bruce, but like thinking of that Brian Toon fellow that I had met at the University of Colorado that was doing research down in the Antarctic. I also met with a guy who I've seen his byline. He's a pretty famous scientist named Raymond Pierre Humbert. And so this is back when I was engaged in all of this, obviously, but I was looking at NASA. So in addition to climate science, a lot of those professors also do planetary science, and this Pierre Humbert was big on modeling planetary atmospheres and so forth, and he had just gotten the pictures from Mars, the rover, NASA. Like, he literally had them in his office.
Wait, do you mean the alleged pictures?
The alleged. I'm only telling this on the conventional level, because I don't know exactly what I was looking at, but at that time, and being younger and less experienced, it was pretty exciting to think, oh wow, these are the actual, this is the raw footage. And he was even pointing out to me places where you could see that water was in the canal, and I'm looking at those, just sort of taken aback.
Now, before we get really sidetracked, sorry to interrupt. When you were in this guy's office and you saw these alleged photos, do you believe that he believed, or as many say, because personally, in talking to a lot of people in academia as well, back when I was in academia many, many years ago, I wouldn't say they're lying or trying to be deceptive. I think they're true believers.
Well, that is actually another question that I was looking forward to posing to you. When I reflect on that, because I've wondered, I mean, as one starts to entertain these ideas that like that much of NASA could be fabricated, or that certainly the moon landing, or even the very nature of our cosmos, we like the scale of lie that is in academia is potentially quite large, with relativity and so forth. So like this Pierre Humbert guy, he had them, and he seemed really nice, and he seemed really sharp too. I don't know that. I'll put it this way. I mean, he could be innocent as far as not being a part of the fraud. I mean, if NASA, it's almost if you bump up another level, and he's this hotshot professor guy he's at the University of Chicago. He has these connections. I mean, he's one of the main scientists on the NASA, Mars rover project or whatever. So they give him that stuff. I mean, he may just be taken with, wow, I'm getting to look at these materials.
Yeah.
And then he takes it from there. You would think, though, that someone in his position, that there would be something fishy about the pictures themselves, but no, I think he's an example of someone that is probably, I mean, could easily be just taking it at face value and then running with it. So further confirming a lot of lies, but kind of accidentally doing it,
That would be my guess for the majority of people in academia. But yeah, if you just want to kind of finish your story, and then I'll explain why I was so interested in having you as a guest on the podcast. Because we had, for those that don't know, I think I even mentioned that I was going to bring somebody on. You're a very astute listener, of course, and we had some very interesting conversations. And that's why I wanted to bring you on. I didn't even know the extent of your background. I was just impressed with the format of your messages and their content, because I was just thinking, well, this guy's a real thinker, so let's have him on the podcast, see what he's got to say. So I actually had no idea you were this involved at the highest levels of academia. But yeah, if you want to just finish telling everybody kind of your experience with it and why you left and where we are now.
Well, I guess it was so I was continuing to pursue that career, and I was going to pursue it. I was actually going to be affiliated with NOAA. They have it's called the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory that is associated with Princeton, and that's where I was actually going to be moving there and then working there, because that, at least at the time, that could have changed, but that there were only two global climate models, that obviously the global climate model incorporates all these tons of submodels and so forth. And so that's where I was going to be working, was on the global climate model there at NOAA. And then as I was trying to put all the logistical things together to get ready to move there, I had what I would describe, and again, it's difficult to convey these things, but it was just a personal epiphany of sorts, because sometimes we wander through our lives and do these things that we think we're supposed to, or just keep doing them rotely. But it was one of those moments where I realized I was going to upend my life completely, and was it really the right thing to do? And even though on one level for me it was it seemed like a very prestigious opportunity, who would turn away from that? And not that I was totally taken with that. I mean, with the prestige of it, but realizing none of that matters. I mean, any human being should just try to do what seems the right thing to do and follow their own instincts. And so, yeah, I decided to torpedo that whole career at that point. And I've even had, actually, through the years, people ask me if I regret that, but really, as each year passes, I don't, because the silliness of those institutions, or of wasting one's whole life in them, and the emptiness of that, just, it seems like it becomes clearer every day. And as we keep seeing how science and scientism, how scientism is usurping science, and that applies in any of these institutions too. I mean, many of the priests of scientism are going to have, their Princeton badge or their MIT badge. Another thing I did want to mention, that just even in talking with people, with that, someone I knew also who had gone to MIT, and um, he was talking about how if you get a PhD from those places, that really what it is supposed to be, this is in its ideal sense at least, is kind of like a certificate to do your own research, like a license, that you've gone through this, and that um so that you should feel confident that you can investigate anything yourself. And I've always even as after I've left all those fields in any formal way now, I've always taken that with me. Then we should all feel a certain extent empowered to do our own research. One doesn't have to go to MIT or something for that. They themselves give themselves that permission to do their own research, but it's really something that obviously any human being can ask questions and try and investigate.
Well, yeah, that's the very nature of the scientific method. So we're going to get into a couple different things here, but I mean, I agree with you as well. I mean, when I left academia, I never looked back, and I never second guessed it either, because we'll get into the psychology of this and why I always talk about real science and logic in connection with psychology. Because when you isolate it from psychology, and we'll be getting into what epistemology is for all the listeners who may not have specifically looked at that term and all of that and all of what it entails. I'm actually kind of surprised I haven't talked about it even more on the podcast, but I thought you were the perfect guest for the epistemology podcast, because not just because of your background, but because of the questions you ask, which many don't ask. Because I don't know if this was some kind of divine intervention or just your intuition telling you not to go down this path. But what you just said about this degree somehow giving confidence and permission, I talk about this all the time. There's no monopoly on science. The whole nature of science is that anybody can utilize a methodology. You don't need a degree. You don't need to go to any kind of indoctrination facility, even if it's a really prestigious indoctrination facility like Princeton or MIT, because you walked the most prestigious halls of quackademia, let's put it.
Yeah.
And you were still able to think about it in a certain objective way. And the second point, which we've also talked about off air a little bit, is the nature of ego. Because you cannot, in my opinion, you cannot separate psychology from logic if you're truly after the truth. And so it seems like you've been able to identify the issues with ego and hubris in these so-called prestigious Ivy League institutions.
Yeah. Because I couldn't agree more that in all these discussions, it doesn't seem like we should be separating psychology from the science, or from the choices that we make about these things. And it's easy to see how a person could so say they've had the good fortune and circumstances have permitted them, and perhaps some aspect of their own ability, but that they've gotten into these places, and doctors would be the same thing. It's like, it's hard to avoid this sense that you're being patted on the back with this extra little bump of prestige. And it takes a certain honesty, I think, and self-reflection for someone to be able to see through that. And there's not like there's anything wrong with going to these places necessarily, but it doesn't make you all-knowing or anything like that, or necessarily wiser than the next person just because you have a degree from one of these places. And especially as we start to notice how much these places are infested with not necessarily very good teaching at all, or just perpetuating certain lies even.
Well, I think also it was on, there was some report recently that I think Harvard got the lowest score for free speech out of every university in the country, or at least every Ivy League school, which is quite interesting, because how can you participate in true learning if you're not even allowed to ask certain questions or pursue certain avenues?
Yeah, no, obviously full spectrum free speech is essential. Also, I saw where even that email or a message to you, it's starting to seem to me almost like scientism has like stealthily replaced science.
Yeah, we could talk about we could talk about what attracted you to the Mind Shock podcast specifically, because you had mentioned even just the reevaluation of relativity itself, the flat Earth conversations. I mean, quite a few different things.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit complex, I suppose. I mean, to set the stage, I think these last few years, I mean, it's become increasingly evident, that there's a lot of fishy stuff going on, and
Yeah.
encountering the mind shock. The thing is, there's all kinds of people it's hard to get really good, precise information, and stumbling on the mind shock podcast was really appealing. I mean, because of the approach to a lot of these issues, and also trying like really pointing out our loss of ability to think logically, or to even to notice like all of the fallacious reasoning that we use in science, or perhaps other areas as well.
Every area.
But
Yep.
yeah, in every area. It's just there's something really unique and helpful, I feel like, for and I think you've done some other podcasts which I haven't seen all of, but even breaking down the system of logical analysis, and having you know it's almost like, as a human being, I mean, like it's really kind of confusing just at the base level of being a human being, and some of these logical, it gives a way to orient oneself in the world, almost, in terms of getting down to that level of like, how do I know what I know, and
I think a lot of
to what
people are
extent can I'm
I
sorry, go
think a
ahead.
lot of people are very distracted, but I think the reason everybody's kind of noticing everything's getting worse and worse is the amount of distractions in the modern world in the past 10 to 20 years. There's way more distractions. So how can there's so much distraction going on that people don't even know they're distracted.
Exactly. In fact, I almost feel like that's one of the things I think is so useful about this podcast, and really something that I mean, again, I would put it in almost grandiose terms, but that every human being should try at least to undertake, is to undistract themselves a little bit. I mean, to realize that in many ways what is served up to them as like what they're supposed to do in a life is is garbage, really. I mean, it's sort of like processed food or something, and that, so instead of being so content, actually, as a side note, that once it struck me that, like, with respect to Hollywood, that these are stars, that's what we call them, and it once hit me like that's a perfect example of the nature of the distraction. I mean, we should be looking at the actual stars, and yet it's like they're
Yeah.
trying to supplant that, and and again, it like makes it disempowers the average individual to be giving away all of their energy looking at these goofballs, you know.
Well, if you want
Yeah.
to, I might I do some of these occult asides sometimes. Some people find them funny. Some people, it shocks their brain, but this is mind shock, so I'll do it here. By Hollywood, you mean they're using holy wood to put a spell on you with their movie magic to distract you with the stars using all of this media. Medea is the goddess of illusion.
Oh, that's funny because all of those, the Medea one, I had not put that one together. The Hollywood, because also, and in fact, I didn't get a chance to listen to the Christmas conspiracy, but that's a whole other subject that I have some theories about too. But yeah, the idea of using holy wood, or holly is the ancient pagan, yeah, but yeah, all that stuff, and Medea too. I had not thought of that one.
Well, it actually
Uh,
gets even sketchier because Medea, the Greek goddess of illusion, is also supposedly she has the gift of prophecy. And a lot of people that believe in predictive programming of Hollywood, either through, for some who believe that whatever a single person thinks, their thoughts control reality. So if you're mesmerizing the masses and you have millions of people watching predictive programming and some kind of Illuminati symbolism, you're literally using the masses that are watching as a battery to facilitate your own vision, but your own, meaning the powers that be controlling Hollywood.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole thing that people need to wake up to, I think, is that yeah, they have a certain power and they're allowing that to be co-opted and allowing their thoughts. I feel like a lot of it has to do with the sanctity of our inner world, and most people have no sense that they even have an inner world that's being constantly polluted by these external, uh, garbage being
And that brings us
thrown
back,
at it.
and that brings us back to the importance of logic. Because
Indeed.
people just don't I say this all the time, but logic is like its own language that unlocks everything. Because
Well, I've definitely started to see that, like with again giving names to fallacies, and where it's like you can almost grasp it on the level beyond the specifics of that particular, as a larger umbrella style of way of getting lost or confusing in arguments. I mean, because that's another thing too, is that a lot of people sort of deliberately use fallacious reasoning to confuse, or even as I think I said in one of some correspondence that I had with you. I mean, it's cool, like just even the straw man argument. I mean, I really didn't fully have that. I would know when that was being done to me, but like I didn't really have a name for it. But now it's like, oh, straw man,
yeah,
like that's what we're dealing with. And that's just one of many tools.
let's get into epistemology. So, and that's another reason I wanted you on this particular podcast, because this esteemed professor here who's literally walked the most prestigious halls of academia in discussing this and why it's so important not to fall for these silly fallacies like appeal to authority or credentials logical fallacies, because they're obviously, you can find doctorates on both sides of every issue. So clearly having that doctorate has basically nothing to do with what the truth is, because even both those doctorates arguing with each other could still be wrong about whatever. That doesn't mean one of them is right. So
Right. Yeah, exactly.
epistemology is generically defined as a branch of philosophy concerned with knowledge, the nature, origin, and scope of knowledge, justification, and rationality of belief. Oxford defines epistemology as the theory of knowledge, especially with regard to its methods, validity, and scope. Epistemology is the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief from opinion. Obviously, logic is very important within epistemology. The four pillars of epistemology are knowledge, truth, critical thinking, and culture.
What
So,
was that last one?
culture,
Oh,
because again, this all interweaves with psychology, because we cannot ignore that our environment shapes our psychology, especially in your younger years. Because if you're told your whole life these experts know everything and that these academic institutions have the monopoly on truth or science for some reason, that everybody falls into that trap. So culture is actually, you can't really examine true epistemology by ignoring culture. And obviously, knowledge, the relationship between knowledge and truth can also be tenuous, because how do you know you really know what you know? And how do you know it's even the truth? And so that's basically what epistemology concerns itself with. I probably should spend more time talking about it, but if one doesn't understand basic logic and reason, then talking about epistemology, I mean, that's kind of, it seems like just from a lot of the commenters, a lot of these triggered goofs, these coincidence theorists, the Dunning-Kruger crowd. I will be doing an extensive podcast on the Dunning-Kruger effect. I haven't done that yet, but there's a lot of interweaving, connecting issues here. So, in kind of continuing what we just mentioned, how many people even pause and reflect to think about how do they know what they know? And
well,
if what they know to be the truth, is it even really the truth?
right, right. Um, I mean, in answer to the first question, I mean, that's I think part of the issue is that a lot of people don't even pause to take inventory of what's going on internally, or to ask themselves, well, why am I so convinced of this? I mean, have I really looked into it? And that's where also the psychology fits in too, because obviously the psychological component can also allow a person to delude themselves into feeling certain about something that they haven't, they haven't investigated the facts of. I also wanted to add something else that I feel like is so potent, and why I really appreciate even the motto of mind shock. And the only thing we know for sure is we don't know anything for sure. And taking that back even in the Plato sort of way, I just would like to suggest that if one really embraces that phrase, and sort of fearlessly, then it's almost like a human being. I mean, perhaps that's a little bit of a road to a different state of mind almost. I mean, that feeling of releasing, like acknowledging that I really don't, the only thing I know for sure is I don't know anything, that there's almost something like all that wanting to defend all these ideas internally that one has. I mean, even if they're doing it subconsciously, like consciously acknowledging that, it seems like it's a powerful salve perhaps for the human psyche in this
definitely.
current era.
And you touched upon many different things right there, because we're talking ego, because particularly in academia, not just academia, I mean, anything, humans tend to associate their beliefs with their own identity. And an assault or blasphemy against their beliefs becomes a blasphemy against themselves personally. And then when you don't understand psychology, now you've opened yourself up to getting triggered and switching whatever logic you might have had completely off. And furthermore, not just with the whole ego trap, there's also a certain amount of mental strength required. I did a few podcasts on metacognition, thinking about thinking, which is also related to epistemology, because people don't examine why. So regardless of whether what you think is true or not, metacognition addresses why you think what you think in the first place, regardless of whether it's true or not.
And I feel like all of those things that you just described, that's a process that, we'll just stay here in America. But like when we talk about the school system and so forth, I mean, who gets that? Who learns that?
One could argue it's intentionally not taught.
Yeah, no, I would argue that. I mean, in fact, if we, I often think of it like, that we have an inner world and then the outer world that we perceive. And it's clear that almost the world that any of us is born into in the present moment is a world that's like almost trying to draw us out and to not even realize that we have an inner world. I mean, it's constantly trying to mesmerize us with distractions and media extravaganzas and stupid entertainment, and
the Matrix, if you will.
yeah. So that it's like you just never even have a chance, and that it's really and again, it's not just to be critical, it's sad. I mean, at least that's I mean, that's one of the things I like about the mind shock and like about trying to share through this conversation, is wanting to empower fellow human beings. Because I mean, if enough people would potentially wake up to their own power and needing to sort of, and again, not just listening to others, but resolving these issues and looking at evidence for these different cases themselves, I mean, that, like, even one person, that takes a big blow out of all that Hollywood stuff. If an individual decides to disconnect from the Matrix, I suppose one could say.
Yeah.
And not just that too, it's actually exciting. I mean, to me, like, going internally is far more interesting. I mean, the life presented to us by corporate powers that be is really boring things to think about too.
Well, you're a very unique individual, because clearly you possessed, either through intuition or whatever that drove you out of academia, you possessed a certain amount of mental wherewithal and a mental strength to reflect. Now, I'm going to ask you, well, Couple things. Have you heard of John Taylor Gatto?
No, I have, but only recently. I feel like I saw his name come up somewhere else.
I
But no, I'm
mentioned
not really
him.
familiar with
I
him.
mentioned him on a few podcasts as well.
Yeah.
He
No, so no, I'm not too familiar with him.
so he was a award-winning teacher in the New York public school system, and he wrote a book. He left all of that because he just couldn't handle it anymore. He wrote a book, Dumbing Us Down: The Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Schooling. And he outlined why most children are literal geniuses, genius level capability when they enter kindergarten or first grade. By the time they graduate high school, you go from 90+% geniuses to less than 5%. So literally, schooling indoctrinates children out of genius thinking ability.
Yeah, that that seems somewhat reasonable and seems like a huge tragedy. You
He
know,
wrote he wrote quite a number of different books, Weapons of Mass Destruction, referring to the American school system. I mean,
or distraction,
what was that?
weapons of mass. What's that?
Instruction.
Oh, okay, weapons of mass
Yeah,
instruction.
yeah.
Okay,
I was talking fast. Weapons of Mass Instruction.
okay.
Yeah, and he was one of the first guys who got me because some of these books are going back to I think his Dumbing Us Down, he might have written in the early 90s. I don't remember his exact timeline, but he was a multiple national award winning public school teacher. I mean, this wasn't some guy who couldn't teach and became disillusioned. I mean, this guy was the top, the cream of the crop, and he left to blow the whistle for the sake of his conscience. I mean, and this was when he was up there in years too. He just saw everything getting dumbed down because you could even argue in the 70s and 80s, the public school system wasn't, I don't want to say it wasn't bad, but it was nothing compared to what it is now. When I was in my earlier years, they literally taught logic in school. They don't do that anymore.
Actually, it's kind of funny because even the like average education, even in rural America, going back 100 years ago, they would get exposed to a lot more classics like that sort of Greek Roman tradition that I don't think they see at all in the current school curriculum.
Well, actually, you know
Um,
what? Now would be time for a fun factoid. Let me bring up let me bring up the exact I don't think you'll find this surprising in the least,
well, I
but
mean, if you're, I was going to add something while you're looking that up.
yeah.
Just thinking of the Gato guy, it's so again, like as far as like why I'm doing this, I mean, it's sad. I mean that we operate at such a lower level than we could, and I mean, and what I would say too is I would dare say suggest that everybody gets their intelligence kind of squelched a little bit. If again, that term intelligence, I feel like is an umbrella of so many different things, and it's kind of gets a little confusing and can be very become a very egotistical thing. But the if you've been burdened with like psychological stuff, I'm just thinking of how so many people grow up where they don't believe in themselves. There's not people that are encouraging them to believe in themselves 100%. And so then internally I think you internalize that and feel you can't. It's like, oh, of course, or I'm a dummy or this kind of stuff. And that's just one trick that can be foisted on a kid. But like, I feel like I had to dispense with a lot of those things, but you have to engage it actively almost and say like, no, I'm part of the universe here. I can, no one, no, it's like almost something that's sacrosanct that no one can take, but we have to reclaim it, you know. And so anyway, yeah, that really bugs me that you know
Well, before
because
before I read this stat, I did want to ask you another question. In all your time in academia, would you say were there more logical, open-minded students at places like MIT or Princeton or in some of these non-prestigious schools?
I think that could. So I would say most people are not what you're describing, and what you're describing is what and I think many of us would seek is in a scientific community is people who just are genuinely interested in pursuing stuff, not wrapping themselves in ribbons. That said, and this also.
You just cut out for a second.
Well, I was just saying I don't feel like in my life experience, people that have become expert in various things or just that are genuinely pursuing topics, I don't think degree necessarily has much to do with it. And when I've met people, say at like less prestigious universities, that they're very that they can be equal to or exceed those. That it just depends on the person. I mean, we just shouldn't make these generalizations. And again, the main point being, just because someone has gone to MIT doesn't mean they know anything. And the criteria that we should use to decide if they know something is based on what they say.
What's funny? I'm actually looking forward to some of the responses here. I know a lot of people are probably not going to believe your credentials or whatever, but of the people that do it, I've talked to you, I've had quite a few conversations with you as well. So I don't doubt what you said at all, because I've also known a number of people who went to MIT and even went on to work for NASA. I've had quite a few debates with PhD professors from several different institutions. And so I've been around all these people. You fit right in terms of just the intellectual level of what you've gone through. Where you're unique, of course, is the logic, because you're not desperately using a degree as a crutch to claim you're right about anything. So
no, and in fact, I mean, I don't, and that I've never really cared about that, and that is, I guess, one little bonus. Even by the time I almost marveled at it myself that I was having such success going down that academic road, but I never, I mean, maybe a little bit, but I never was prone to take it super seriously. I've always been just much more interested in good content, I mean, like, the degree doesn't really mean anything.
Well, I'm just curious as the responses, because I get attacked by a lot of people who ask, well, what are your I mean, they just spam the credentials fallacy and the appeal to authority fallacy. And my response is, of course, I mean, are these people that deficient they can't address my argument? The only thing they can do, because I can find people with way more degrees than me and less making the same arguments I'm making. So why don't we actually discuss the argument? But someone who's actually been at, you have a number of degrees, professor, you worked at a national laboratory. It would be curious to see what kind of problems they would have with what you're saying, because they're not going to be able to use that line.
Well, and because based on the experience I have too, I mean, that's why I feel like it's useful in terms of being able to evaluate an individual who's speaking, high quality information that's worth listening to. Because I think anyone, when you stumble onto MINDSHOCK, it's like you're doing something that's, unique. And you tackle so many different topics. I mean, I could imagine someone saying, oh, who's this guy? How does he know? But there's another thing that you've done that I appreciate. One time you were talking about like being a plumber or something, and you were referring to yourself saying, I'm not a plumber, but I've done some plumbing. I mean, I also feel like that degree stuff is so silly because it confines us from being. I've always had this attitude that like maybe I can learn this or maybe I can't, but I'm not going to close myself off in advance. And there's no reason that we can't be well versed in a lot of different areas. Again, the thing to judge it on is the content itself. So as soon as I started listening to you, it's like this is someone that I'm enjoying this. This is provoking me.
It's kind of funny because I intentionally do not want to state my so-called credentials in academia, because everyone else does it to bolster their argument. In my opinion, that would be a white flag for my argument. So I'm intentionally not stating it, because that would make my argument weaker.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, even when you watch some of these Earth shape debates, and you see those guys that are globe Earth that are constantly trying to hide behind some kind of,
Yeah, we're gonna get to
bogus.
we're gonna. I do have some flat Earth questions for you in a second, but here's the factoid I just brought up. The
Okay.
U.S. Department of Education was founded in 1979. At that time, the United States was ranked number one in education. After 40 years of government run education, the United States has fallen to number 24. And there are different evaluations, but I couldn't find the US in the top 10 anywhere. So it's between the 13th and 24th since a few decades of government run education. So before the US Department of Education existed, before government oversight, the United States was number one. And so it seems like anything the government touches, it turns to garbage. And for whatever reason, people can't see it. No matter like, is there anything the government has touched that hasn't been made worse as a result of its touching?
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting statistic. I mean, it really also shows you because sometimes one gets the feeling here in America, at least, that this is becoming a bit of like a asylum or something.
Yeah.
And if the education is plummeting to that degree, because I mean, it is sad, and it's not. I mean, I feel like sometimes people are so critical and they only go to the surface. It's not necessarily all of these people's fault, but one definitely gets the sense that here in America, there's a lot of people that I mean, they know how to tie their shoes. I mean, like, uh, you know,
Yeah, let's not fall for false dichotomies. I mean, obviously, the other thing, a lot of things are different since 79. There's way more chemicals in the food, air, water. There's way more injections. There's way more, a lot of different things since 1979. So it's not that it's one thing, but to your point, it's not necessarily the fault of these poor children being funneled through public schooling while, there's all this other stuff going on. It's almost even shocking that there are the amount of logical critical thinkers that there are around, isn't it?
actually, no, I couldn't agree more. If there's anything that we have to count on, I think is that the discovery in an individual human being of logic and reason and also just sort of reclaiming their selves as part of nature, independent of any state institution or something. No, it is kind of grounds for optimism because it keeps happening, at least somewhat, in spite of all efforts to crush it out.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird paradox where the more dumb people there are, the more logical people there also are.
Yeah, and one would hope also this is kind of just a slight tangent, but I was going to say just in developments over these last 50 years, like you've got that education component there, and then I also feel like there is the evil aspect, we'll call it, I guess, but somewhere someone's pulling strings that are helping to sustain this weird worldview, and I was going to use the example of football because I did watch the little podcast. I definitely didn't. I mean, I definitely didn't watch the Super Bowl. And this is not to say I have been into sports. There's nothing wrong with sports, but not so much these days. But seeing that podcast, and then I've seen it referenced elsewhere where there's suspicion that the thing was rigged,
Yeah.
and seeing those ones where the guys aren't tackling, and then the absurdity of the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce thing. Like, so I remember when I was a little kid watching football, and I mean, at least it seemed like it was a sport.
Yeah.
I mean, this thing that's so like woven into American culture, and now it's like barely even disguised. I mean, because I can't help, I don't know for sure, of course, but that looked rigged to me, and
Yeah,
it
that
wouldn't
was the most
surprise me.
the most shocking thing to me because I've seen some of this conversation. I thought they were just weird one-off plays. When I started watching literally all these plays back to back that are so obviously botched by multiple players, I was shocked at how blatant it was. Like I went in thinking, maybe it's rigged, maybe it's not. And then after looking through it, because I actually used to play football many, many years ago, we would have got completely destroyed by the coach for even doing a small fraction of what these so-called professional players were doing. There's just it's completely shocking how obvious it is.
Well, no, exactly. It seems like it's getting, and so then it's even extra sad if you're like a big football fan that's like, your entire life has just been vindicated because the Chiefs won or something, and like they didn't even win. I mean, it's not even a real game. That
Yeah,
because there
it's
was that
sad.
one. Yeah, there's one tackle there. It would be interesting to hear other football players like pro level analyze, because there's one. It's like you're not trying to tackle him. I mean, it's
I have a
obvious that you're.
friend. I have a friend who's hardcore into the NFL, and he goes back and forth on a lot of this stuff where he'll get super pissed off at some of these games, and he'll say, "Oh, it's all fake." But then, literally a few weeks later, he's back into it, pretending it's real. It's almost like pro wrestling, like the same thing that happened with pro wrestling.
Pretending it's real.
Well, no, it's weird because obviously not all the plays look botched. Some of them look totally legit, and maybe they are. It's just there's so many that aren't. So it's even with
Well,
pro
as I've
wrestling, I mean, in pro wrestling, those guys are slamming each other hard. Sometimes they're even kicking and punching each other in the head for real.
Yeah, the wrestling thing is weird. Because yeah, no, they definitely get physical, and yet it's fake. My feeling about the football thing, I mean, again, I didn't watch it, but I would guess if they're going to do something. But this last one seemed super blatant, especially even with the Taylor Swift thing and all that. But
In the
I
comments,
figure they probably.
they were actually saying there were two other Super Bowls that were even worse and more blatant.
There might be. I mean, I haven't even seen him recently, and I know that halftime thing has become so bizarre. Like
Yeah.
I mean, it's so Roman, the whole thing. Uh, you know, but as far as rigging it, I've sort of figured that they probably play the game for a while. But all those plays that were so blatant, it seemed like it was in the overtime. It's like that's when they kick in. Like okay, no tackling of the other team.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's beyond weird. This is a good segue into Rome, though. I just had this thought. So, was the Roman Colosseum and bread and circus simply the recycling of a previous civilization's bread and circus? Because the explanation we're given on why all these football stadiums or all of these stadiums look like Roman Colosseums is an homage to Rome. So if Rome didn't even invent it, and we're going through many different civilization cycles, mud flood, Tartaria, what are your thoughts on all of that? And then we'll go to flat Earth after that. Yeah, so we'll have the opinion of a professor
I
from
would like to delve more into this
yeah,
topic because the whole mud flood stuff and the nature of time and I have some other interesting or just side theories I'd like to put forth, not necessarily right now though, but at first blush at least, I mean, yeah, so I don't know about Rome and its preceding civilizations, and again, so assuming the unfolding of time and the way that we conventionally think of it, as opposed to the entire world age condensed into a moment or something, it strikes me that Rome, I feel like I've sort of teased this out just on my own over these last several years, starting to see the outlines of Rome as kind of the big seed, or that it kind of consolidated perhaps some other things that were happening, but in this, that Rome has kind of been running roughshod for the last couple thousand years. I even have some side little theories about that, even things like the Holy Roman Empire, where it's from the Roman Catholic Church. With the Holy Roman Empire, they don't even have a physical empire, and yet they're running all of Europe in various ways, just through an idea level almost, if that makes any sense. So that's where I started cracking up when I realized that, like, not only is football bread and circus, but they actually play in coliseums.
yeah.
So to me, I took that as almost that sneaky joke kind of thing that the villainous side seems to do.
Well, it's even
I say,
worse because I believe from the accounts the bread was free in the Colosseum, but the all of the in our modern society, not only are the hot dogs, you have to pay for the crappy food, but you have to pay an arm and a leg more than
it's
you
gotten
would at the supermarket.
yeah. So even further humiliation for the
Yeah.
average plebe.
Yes.
Because Yeah, the prices of the stuff. In fact, I don't even know how people can afford to go to the Super Bowl. It's kind of like going out to eat or something. I mean, everything, these prices rise so high, but that there's that many people that can, I mean, God knows what the tickets cost. You know, where I live, there's a farm baseball team. And just going to see one of those games that's like AAA farm baseball, the hot dog's $10.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like it's crazy. You just have to stay away from concessions. So yeah, we may
Yeah.
not even be having as much fun as the Romans did.
Yeah.
So
Well, if
yeah,
not to constantly go on asides, but this is mind shock. So if the year was hijacked and the one was an I, so this is really, so the year 1100 would have been 100.
okay.
So I don't know if you've checked out the Altered History podcast series on MindShock.
So I'm going through that one. That's why I was trying to remember if that's where I'd heard that about like the or I feel like I might have seen that somewhere else. Just why is there one AD? I mean, how did that get decided on as a
Well, not only
uh
that, but supposedly everything was mistranslated, and the one is a J or an I, and it's not a one. So this would be the year 1024, not 2024, since Christ, whatever that means. Some people believe that the millennium reign of Christ already happened, and we're living after that right now in the ruins of the world, which would have been the foundations, the found nations. And the
yeah.
Freemasons were the one who's got all the masonry of all the buildings for free.
Yeah, actually, so that reminds me of another interesting thing. This is a huge topic though, because I do feel like I have some other stuff I'd like to interject, but I guess well, I'm thinking two things, but one, as far as inhabiting buildings that are already there and sort of claiming them, I think you actually did bring it up in one of them, but the Aztecs are an excellent example of that too. And in fact, both the Aztec and Incan civilizations, which didn't even last, I mean, I think for a lot of people, they get confused. They all run together, but I mean, there is a succession of these different civilizations, and Incas and Aztecs, both respectively, only lasted like 250 years. And both of them kind of didn't know where they came from. I mean, to where they were almost like trying to reconstruct certain mythologies, sort of like the Nazis or other groups have done, trying to sort of conveniently make a mythology that elevates the Aztecs. But that I forget if it's Teotihuacan or it's the other. I think it's Teotihuacan though, was a Toltec building, and they would often refer to the Toltecs as these like super wise people, but they kind of inhabited because for whatever reason the Toltecs had disappeared. But so I just thought of that as an interesting example of, I mean, here's a group just not even that long ago, like at least according to conventional timeline, be 1300 or 1350 AD, finding a giant building from a previous civilization and being like, this looks good. Let's let's take over.
Well,
Um,
it gets so crazy because I mean, even going back, supposedly again, I don't know if the Olmecs are supposedly the oldest or if Atlantis was before them. I mean, obviously, just the whole nature of history, his story, these are all just stories. We have no way of knowing what is true, how is it true, which all circles back to epistemology because are we just taking all of this on faith? Because to think that all these archaeologists throughout history are just completely infallible and they translated all of this perfectly. I mean, that's kind of silly,
it's kind of
especially just
silly.
knowing the nature of humans and ego and psychology. Even if they found out they did it all wrong, would they admit it? Just like, I mean, I don't know if this is the proper time to segue into flat earth because I know a lot of the flat earthers listening are really going to want to know the thoughts of someone who's been in the upper levels of academia, a literal professor, you know, MIT, Princeton, whatever, what you think of flat earth. But however you want to tackle that stream of questions, the floor is yours.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, okay, I kind of lost my train of thought there on the Teotihuacan
Well,
Aztecs.
the first question was kind of, I think the Olmecs are
I
supposedly
was
the
going to
first.
say the Olmecs. Okay, so yeah. So again, and I feel like whenever I read anything about yeah, I always take it with a certain grain of salt, and I feel like you almost have to use a little intuition to try and see how honest an academic's assessment of stuff is and what have you. But I think conventionally the Olmecs are thought to be even pre-Mayan, almost like maybe 3000 AD or something. I mean, maybe. But to your point, they're the ones that have those gargantuan heads that like are multiple tons,
Yeah.
which again, like, why are these ancient civilizations always working with materials that we as present humans would never think of using?
Well, let me interject
Well,
again with a mind
yeah,
shock, if you don't mind.
no, although I don't. Although I'll just finish that about the
Yeah,
giant heads, because when you look at those, I mean, they have a distinctly African American kind of, or not African, excuse me,
yeah,
but and I'm not saying for sure, but you know, several of they definitely have an African look to them, more so than than like what we know of as current Central America.
yes,
Yet that gets totally disregarded. Of course, it's not African. I mean, it's like, how can you say that, Professor So and So?
yeah,
Uh, I mean, especially when visually, like, you should at least ask the question.
yeah.
So, okay, sorry. Yeah, your
So
point.
what if all these giant heads and statues? This has fascinated me for quite some time in my research into giants and the mud flood and the theories of Medusa, the theories of ancient weapons. Was the world literally turned to stone? And these are not carvings, but they were literal beings that were turned to stone. I actually go over this on the Altered History podcast, and Mud Fossil University supposedly actually sampled some of these statues, and it came back as DNA sequences.
Whoa. Which university did that?
It's not a real university. The YouTube channel Mud Fossil University.
Oh, okay. Did they extracted something from some of the
So
stone?
he actually had, yes, he took a piece of the stone. So if I got the story correct, I think the video is still up, but he documented the whole thing. He knew they would never tell him what it was if he told them what it was. So he sent an unknown sample and asking what it was. So he took a tiny little piece, and so nobody could know what it was. And they sent him a report back that it was human DNA. And
Wow.
then he documented what he sent them. And apparently their response was, "We've never interacted with you and we've never tested anything for you before."
Oh,
And
wow.
he sent it to multiple. So this reminds me, I totally forgot the guy's name. When I first started studying giants decades ago, there was a guy who found a giant skeleton and he knew the Smithsonian would cover it up. So he sent them a sample without telling them what it was. It came back also human DNA. And then he told them what it was. And he documented, like, he actually sent all these samples with signature requirements and made copies of everything. He even had logs of when he dropped it off at their last, so nobody could say that he wasn't there, and yet they still did. And then, but he has all the evidence that he communicated with them, and they did these tests for him, and he also sent it to independent labs. So he had all the evidence, and this Mud Fossil University guy, I'm guessing he kind of went through the same framework, but I don't know if he was as meticulous about documenting all this. Some people think it's all a hoax, but I just found it interesting. And also, if you find pieces of even boulders just out in the woods, they do look like capillaries and veins when you split even an old rock in half. And just looking through a lot of this stuff, I mean, some of it looks like organs or whatever. So if these old legends about literally the rocks crying out, I mean, I think that's in the Bible, right? There's a passage, even the rocks cry out. I mean, are all these mountain ranges, are all rocks everywhere simply former living tissue of giant creatures?
Yeah, that's well, and even before totally addressing that it's another thing that I think is a good service of mind shock is also just even for myself feeling empowered to investigate anything, and then you don't have to believe it, but that. So I just want to say that because yeah, this is a new one. I mean, a Medusa like stonification of the entire planet.
Well, for those
Such.
for those that don't believe, there are statues in palaces. I want to say St. Petersburg in Russia, but there's a couple. There might be some in France too, where there's actually statues of people, of women wearing translucent veils over their face. I mean, how could anybody sculpt that? They're wearing chainmail, or I mean, it's either super advanced laser 3D printing type technology, or it was a person turned to stone. Because even today, nobody can carve that out of stone. How do you carve translucent clothing?
Right, right. Well, and that is another weird aspect. Just in see where I've always approached these things too before is that yeah, you go as far as you can, and then you just have to acknowledge it's mysterious. We don't have
Yeah.
the answer, like right there at the cusp of what we know of as history. That's kind of what I always go to. But thinking of this, like, how could they carve that with the veil, or another thing to me with the pyramids, it's like, we act like we can do everything that they did in the present, and yet I definitely read somewhere that to make the Great Pyramid, maybe we could do that just now. We have sufficient cranes and so forth, but all of the engineering and everything that went into that, and then the precision of the masonry and all that.
I believe there was there was a single piece column. Is it at Baalbek, where even the most powerful crane in the world today can't lift it? And there's a single piece column. I mean, they still can't do it. I think the one in Baalbek is heavier than even the largest stones of the Great
I mean, to
Pyramid.
me, that could be used as an argument for, I mean, with regard to our dismissal of civilizations that have come before, and again, kind of getting back to that Rome thing, because I would suggest like the Rome thing has, I mean, again, there's pockets where it hasn't, and America would seem like the heart of it at the moment, but it's spread over the whole globe now. But there's wisdom that, and those are our relations too. I mean, those are other human beings, I think. And so, yeah, the idea of dismissing what the knowledge of previous civilizations just seems absurd, and dismissing it because we're so excited about this current like frenzy of madness that we're participating in but we've got computers and phones.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the question all the flat earthers have been waiting for. So, what does a high level professor that's been through academia for many years, worked at national labs, what was your initial response when you saw a flat earth video or were introduced to the flat earth theory?
Well, let's see. Okay, it's hard to explain. I feel like I mean, I've always been suspicious of the mainstream and many of the things we've been discussing, the external versus the internal world. I've always been just suspicious of what I've been getting externally. But I will say, and actually it starts with the moon thing, which I'm actually laughing just to think, having arrived at this point. But I've been thinking that I should check out the moon landing for a little while, but just avoided it because I knew that, you know, once you open that door, like, yeah, we didn't go to the moon, which immediately puts you in a different, a different group, so to speak. But the whole thing is like, if we didn't go, we didn't go, and that's kind of been my attitude all along. And so actually, I can even remember the first flat Earth. I was really enjoying MindShock, and then a flat Earth thing came up. I was like, oh no, do we have to go there? Uh, as you're going to analyze one of those debates. And I even was like, oh no, I think this Bruce McGuire fellow may fall off in my estimation. And and then I started watching the debate. I think it was the one. It was that KC Industries versus that
Craig.
Craig. And I started watching, and this was like, oh my god, look at this. And then you start hearing it, and that's why I actually had even thought of suggesting like little short blast podcasts, even just based on my own recent experience. But like I think in that one you started getting into the Eddington stuff,
Yeah.
and so I've read a lot. I mean, I was happily swimming around in relativity, and you know, and when you read the interpretations in even higher end texts, or certainly in your Kaku or Tyson's, you know, uh, or Sagan, you know, you never get that like the Eddington thing. These are just solid. Like this is the case. You never really, the idea that he may have had fraudulent results or whatever is going on with the interpretation of Michelson Morley. In fact, I was just talking with someone else about that, and we maybe shouldn't cover it now, but I would like to get back to that because I think you hinted at something. I've been digging into that Michelson Morley a little bit more though.
To me,
And
I have a unique position because to me, Mickelson Morley doesn't even get off the ground because the null result was not a true null. It was rounded to null. So everything built off of that is, in my opinion, a house of cards, regardless of whether you're looking at, okay, ether exists and there's no movement, or ether doesn't exist and there's movement, whatever, because everybody just skipped over that. And I'm very meticulous. I'm reading through it, and it's it was rounded to a null result. And to me, I can't get past that. Because
well,
if the technology is that fallible that you have to round to null, I mean, I'm throwing the whole experiment out.
yeah. I mean, I suppose there are, I mean, I have heard of that, of rounding where that you're like almost like order of magnitude rounding, because that's how little, like, I think they do that sometimes in sort of quantities in the atmosphere of like a trace
Yeah. Yeah.
chemical. It's so little that like you're in, but well, this non-null result from Michelson Morley, like, so for you that implies that the whole experiment is like, what did that mean, or what could that mean, the non-null result?
So I kind of went over it. I forgot which pod. I think I went over it on the Joe Rogan versus Eddie Bravo analysis because they were harping on it because he had Jamie pull it up and they didn't even read it properly. They didn't
Right.
even read even the mainstream information properly. So it was kind of a train wreck. But basically, even if we throw out the null rounding to null, the experiment still doesn't prove anything because you're either operating with ether exists or ether doesn't exist. So you'd have to kind of solve that question first because depending on that, you still can't really prove anything with that experiment. So it's kind of two levels of houses of cards. So I mean, I might do a podcast going even deeper, but to me, it's just unless you're going to firmly this could all be obviously circular reasoning or false premise arguments, and that would be logically fallacious. So I don't want to spend too much time on that when the base isn't firm.
Yeah, which actually that whole idea of the base not being firm, and in terms of the pyramid of knowledge, I mean, I think that's something that we're definitely starting to recognize, is that the base is not firm for a
Yeah, I
number
talk
of
about
things.
that all the time, or at least acknowledging the possibility that the base isn't what people think it is. And so
So
you
the
kind of skirted the question a little bit, but with the flat earth. So what is a professor's immediate response to that who has left academia? And also I saw an old video of a Harvard some PhD in math at Harvard who was a flat earther, and he did a couple videos and then he disappeared from the internet forever. So I don't know if
wow.
you know who that was, but
No, I mean, I do know someone that was at Harvard that, like, up into the 60s, actually was a detractor of plate plate tectonics, which had reached the point, because even that plate tectonics wasn't really that solidified, so to speak,
I mean,
until,
is it solidified even now?
is it solidified even now? I mean, everything's on the table, where I do have to confess, a year ago, I would have had a lot more confidence. Well, okay, so let me get to that question of yours. Although I just wanted to insert on the Mickelson, that experiment. I had kind of almost, I think maybe I'm thinking about it wrong. I need to get back into it, but I was almost thinking that the experiment did sort of prove the ether, like that's what, and then in order to dismiss that, that's why they did the relativity.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, no, that is the timeline that they were going with. Yes.
but you're saying though that it really isn't even, you can't conclude for sure that the ether is there.
I mean, I'd have to look at it again. The problem was the sensitivity of the equipment and rounding to null. I think they assumed that it was within the margin of error, which brings us back. If you're assuming, are you participating in a rigorous scientific experiment?
Yeah. What practice of science text includes, assume as much as possible. Uh, the
I just couldn't
well,
get
okay.
I couldn't get past the point that they're rounding to null and then trying to say something.
Right. No, it's the whole thing. No, I feel like I want to dig in further to it still, but it's a big deal as far as justifying relativity in a lot of the books that generations later, like myself, have been reading. So to not know the details of it, I mean, it seems
Well,
like it was
The
definitely,
Cavendish is even worse
yeah, that
because
one. I mean, yeah,
they're literally ignoring all electromagnetic forces and the innate electric properties of matter. And I'm not sure if you're aware of De Palma's experiment. That when I was researching this a long time ago, this stuff is really hard to find on the internet now. I believe I have the pages saved. This stuff is literally not, you cannot search for it on Google anymore. But there was
wow.
an experiment with De Palma where he actually did it in a vacuum and mass did not attract mass.
Whoa.
So I have to look at it again, and I know a lot of people were arguing with his results, and I don't know if he ended up being laughed off as a crackpot, which often happens to anybody going against the official narrative. But I was quite fast. This was in my early research of relativity, where if there's some serious problems with even the basics of gravity, and that's
Right.
why they kind of adjusted. Austin Whitsett's actually really good because he gets all of the up to date. Because even now, they're no longer stating that mass is attracting mass. They've introduced all of these additional theories: dark matter, bending, warping, space time with 10 different new layers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The dark energy. Don't forget about the
yeah,
other dark.
yeah. So
Uh,
they've
that's
abandoned. They've
wild though.
Yeah.
So they don't. So mass attracting mass. They don't say that anymore.
So they say that in public sound bites or overview pages. But when you go into the minutia of all the new papers being written, that not only is that not claimed, it's specific. There's other factors that are specifically cited, excluding it, so you won't even find it anymore.
Interesting. I knew that they were also trying to cobble together a graviton as like a sort of a particle of gravity or something that would communicate, which also seemed. And then that was another one I thought was excellent. And this is something also because of my background, I do feel like it helps me. It does help me tease out some of this stuff. When you showed the guy, and I remember when they got those results from LiDAR, I think, but where supposedly it was a confirmation of gravitational waves.
LIGO, yeah, they injected the data without telling the researchers. I mean, think about to me. I mean, forget about the scientific field in general. This is just children's level morality. They're gonna let all those scientific researchers think that the result was legit. Like they're celebrating, yay! And coincidentally, on the anniversary of Einstein's theory, they found it.
Oh,
They're so happy. I mean, that's like emotional abuse.
well, and had received the NASA Mars pictures. I mean, it makes it even more sinister. I mean, if those people that get the results that they've been sort of directed to do are then celebrating and everything, and yet like they themselves are like mice in a terrarium or
Yeah,
something. I
yeah.
mean, yeah, going like, we found gravitational waves, and the whole thing's just a
Well,
joke.
you know what's absolutely bonkers though. This is what people don't get. Like the people in the chat when I pointed all that out, they said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." They admitted to that being injected, but then the results they got later, they were real. And my response is, "Well, how would you know?" Like if
Yeah.
somebody's a repeat offender, if you have a serial killer on trial, they've already killed 10 people. I mean, you're right. Maybe they didn't kill this guy, but why would you trust that?
No, that's a whole other phenomenon that it seems like it should have a name, like Stockholm syndrome or
Well,
something.
that
But
that would work. That would work.
you know, but this whole thing, because I actually feel like I'm having this discussion all the time in a lot of different areas, not just science. I feel like some of these people that have been demonstrated to lie, I mean, they need to like have to wear a little medallion that says
Well, you know
liar
what's
or
yeah, no, that's a
dunce
great
or something.
point because you know
Because
what's
these
absolutely
people keep
bonkers. Some of these
and
big, yeah, some of these big pharma companies have literally the largest fines for fraud in history. You know what? I'm going to name names. This is public info. Pfizer has multi-billion dollar fines and sanctions for fraud. I mean, you can go to the Department of Justice website and look all these court rulings up for fraud. So literally the most corrupt fined company in the history of the world for fraud. And people are not only trusting them with new experimental treatments, but defending them by calling anyone who questions the number one fraudsters in
just
history.
even at first cut, when I see that Bourla guy, who's the CEO of Pfizer, I think, the idea that he's even advocating, like, how unscientific is that? I mean, this is a guy who totally has a horse in the race, and then he's telling you, "Oh, this is
Yeah,
a great product."
it seems like the masses don't even know what conflict of interest is because if you understand conflict of interest, that solves that problem right off the bat.
Yeah, this is where also it gets into the emotional and psychological components to all of this, because I do feel like a lot of the people that are listening to Bourla and even buying the whole Pfizer, listening to Fauci, it's all this response because they somehow managed to turn Trump into something that's like so frightening to them. I mean, even totally irrational,
We need
totally.
to do a pod. I have a podcast coming on TDS because this is a phenomenon we haven't quite seen before.
No, it's allowing a level of propaganda that's just
Yeah. Well, we gotta
staggering.
wrap this up, but
Okay,
do you
so
have a short answer for the flat earth
I
answer?
do, and I really want to get that in because the so the question is like, how have I approached the flat Earth information?
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely didn't want to go moon. Well, yeah, so I went through that. So after watching a little bit of it though, and yeah, I circling back, like with Mickelson Morley, like when I hear those things about Eddington, and then you go and investigate it, like no, that was all new stuff to me, and so I kind of feel like my whole scientific model is, and which is as it should be. We should always be willing to adjust in the face of new information. I mean, that's one thing I feel like can't know anything for sure, except I don't know anything for sure.
Yeah.
But things are, I do feel like, things are constantly changing and evolving. And so, in terms of our ideas, and actually, as you often say too, I mean, what we know about the physical universe at this moment is minuscule compared to all of the depth of it. So sorry for rambling, but no, I have found it actually day by day rather enriching to contemplate a different shape of the earth. And I feel like, even like you said, I feel like it's important. At the first cut, it almost like the stranglehold that scientism has on us, it breaks that. I mean, even if it's still a globe, at least like some of these experiments and all of this perpetual like fetishizing and worship of relativity or evolution, without any details or even thinking of what it means, what does it really mean, or does it really enrich your life, to think relativity. um I feel like I'm rambling, but overall, my impression of it is that it seems like it's naturally scientific, really, to pursue these ideas, and that there's ample evidence to think that there may be much more to the story. And I've especially enjoyed contemplating the cosmos and space, because when you start to, like, just internally, when you start to disable that relativity handcuff, say, I feel like I'm relating differently with stars and thinking about them differently, and with the cosmos, or with things like from the ancient civilization angle, as we discussed earlier, seeing that the way that the yin yang corresponds, you know, to sort of that flat Earth, sun, moon.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that that symbol like fits that so well, and other things.
You're not willing to write it off as coincidence. Is that what you're saying?
No, not willing to write it off as just coincidence at all. Totally seeking for more information. I mean, I know that, yeah, it's not, but I'm certainly not going to say like the globe's a sphere. I mean, like, I'm not going to say that with conviction. And I do also enjoy the way that when you start thinking of different approaches. I mean, this is something that I did want to share, but I'm not going to bother because we don't have time. But like, I was just reading this Navajo thing, about some of their approach to the directions, and so much ancient information that I've been exposed to that talks a lot about the North Pole as being like an entry point. So thinking of it differently outside of this current scientism model, I find it very satisfying, because it seems to also mix with certain ancient mythologies, so to speak.
And I think, yeah,
It
and
makes
what you
sense.
said actually perfectly encompasses the epistemology in general. Just it needs epistemological scrutiny, which basically you say flat Earth warrants. And I agree. That's why, we go over a lot of flat Earth stuff. Also, just developing logic. And also, I think you used the correct word there, fetishizing. Because why are all these people so triggered? Because you're right. Even these experiments could be complete bunk and the world could still be a globe. But it's like these people, they've fetishized this to such a level where
Yeah,
they
yeah,
can't
and
even
like you said
handle.
earlier, yeah, identified with it to where it almost kicks off like a fight or flight thing. Like if you're just saying
Yeah.
something that, oh, I just lost something that, oh, it'll come to me. It was something
Well, I
funny, I
mean,
think.
we're kind of out of time for now, but we'll definitely have you back on. I'm very curious as to what all the mind shockers are going to think about your responses. And I mean, we have you, a professor, a very prestigious professor who's been MIT, Princeton, whatever, and then also Sid Irwin, who I've had on the podcast a couple of times. I mean, I don't know if he's actually in the Prometheus Society, but he hasn't denied it, which would be the top IQs in the world, much more exclusive than Mensa. And he wasn't triggered by flat Earth either. So I think we might actually see a lot
Yeah,
more intelligent people who have been through academia kind of dissenting once scientism becomes this level of obvious. Also, that's another good phrase you had. It does have a stranglehold on the world because people, instead of holding logic and reason in esteem, they hold scientism in esteem.
yeah, and even on, I mean, exactly, and on further reflection too, that idea, like with relativity, I mean, it gives you this very fixed idea of how the stars evolve and develop, and they're very removed. But then, it's almost like by breaking that stranglehold, it opens up. I I don't want to go on too long, but
Yeah, we're out of time. You know what'd be interesting? I'm gonna reach out to Run Z Cow and see if he'd be open to doing a podcast with us.
oh, that would be killer. Yes,
Because he kind of, it seems like he disappeared and he didn't want to rock the boat too much. But it would be interesting if he was open to being back in the limelight. Because I think because he's a force and he's really good at dumbing things down. So he could, if he went more public with it, I think he could probably, help out, bringing down scientism and bringing back real science.
which, and that's the whole thing too. I mean, you can even see as soon as you start watching him, it's like it, but it requires effort. a
Yes.
lot of people can't listen to
Mental
someone
strength,
like
not
that
just
now.
effort, but a certain amount of mental strength. But
Yeah,
so
no, definitely. But it seems like a lot of people like to keep the conversation like that's too much information. It seems like a lot of these debates like to stay at a very low
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
like
So
flirts and
yeah,
more, oh, you idiots. Again, it's a
well,
psychological phenomenon, really.
yeah.
It's like sort of childish high school stuff.
So
Uh,
thanks again for joining us, Professor Jay Smith here, and he'll be back again. So everyone drop your comments, and I hope everybody enjoyed another edition of the Mind Shock podcast. This is Bruce McGuire. Catch you guys next time.